all of us here, whether we're from the United States, from South Africa, from Italy, from Germany, from Indonesia, from Timor-Leste, from Bangladesh, from Morocco, or from the Maldives, I think we all agree on one thing. We all agree that public office, politics, policy level jobs, or attaining leadership is difficult on women. And we agree that it is difficult for women. But I'm certain that we all also agree on the absolute necessity for women in politics and in leadership. I'm sure I don't need to go into why this is necessary. The fact that women represent approximately half of the world's population is in itself a good enough reason. But we also know that's not the only reason. We also know that women's presence and women's voices in all stages of policy making, legislating, decision making and implementing are better for all our societies. Unfortunately, that isn't really the reality, and we are nowhere near it. I am, for example, one of just 4 women in the Maldives Parliament. We are 87 parliamentarians with only just 4 women, and unfortunately, it has been like that for the past 10 to 15 years. We're not seeing an upward trend, we're seeing the status quo remain as it is. Sometimes it even feels like we're sliding back, even as we are able to make progressive legislation. Sometimes it feels like we're sliding back in just the numbers. We need to ensure that you and I, that women in politics, that women in leadership, we need to ensure that you and I are not just samples. We need to ensure that we don't remain as urban myths because we are just so few in number. We need to ensure that we are the norm rather than a standout sample. Let me just directly first speak to the women in this workshop aspiring to positions of leadership or aspiring to work in public office or in politics. I know it's difficult. I've been there. I've been at the starting position. I know how difficult it is. You might face financial obstacles. You will face public shaming. You will face name calling. And very often, all this name calling, all these insults will be gender based. You might lack family support. You're very likely to face political violence. In the case of Maldives, you might face even state-sponsored political violence. You might face legal persecution. You might and you're very likely to face backlash from religious extremists, depending on where you're from. And it might, I know in fact that it will feel like public office is an added responsibility. You cannot add on to the already existing responsibilities in the home and in your communities that you might already carry. You might have had tried before and not succeeded. But I want to say, keep in mind why you wanted to go into this in the first place. Keep that focus and remember that your community and your country and your societies and your parliaments and the workplaces, they need honest, strong, capable and willing women. You need to do it because if you don't do it, who will? I want to discuss a little bit about how we can break barriers that we face. We all agree that we face many barriers. How can those of us in leadership positions, how can we help those aspiring? What we need to do, I think all of us, what we need to do is continue speaking up. We need to continue raising our voices. We need to continue to advocate for legislative changes, for policy changes, for changes in how our parties choose candidates, how we fund candidates. We need to advocate for better environment for women. We need to advocate for better party frameworks. We need to remain involved in affecting and advocating for these changes that we want. We need to continue to educate our male colleagues. We need to enlist them as our partners. And we have to keep on calling out everyday sexism wherever we find it, because we need to make our workplaces and our communities a safe environment for women to work in. I know there seems to be an added burden when you're a woman in office, when you're a woman in position of leadership or in public office. demands on women representatives seem to have different standards of accountability. At least that is how I feel. But I have learned to embrace it. We have the usual responsibilities we carry for our constituencies and our work. But we also must bear the extra burden or responsibility of fighting the good gender fight. When we are so minuscule in numbers, when we are so few in numbers, it might feel like a lot of pressure. But it is what it is, and we have to keep on taking up women's issues and bringing in women's voices so that we make it easier for the women coming from after us or even next to us. Which brings me to networking. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Adnan Foundation for all the networking that you provide for us. Such networks, women's networks, should help us in sharing best practices, and frankly, I think it gives us women more courage and more confidence in where we go next. Women's political networks such as this are critical for increasing women's political participation, recruitment, and leadership. What I like especially is the trainings that the Adnan Foundation offers young women. I say this because whenever I speak to aspiring younger women, their doubts always center around, or initially center around, am I good enough? Do I know what I'm doing? Do I know the subject matter? Am I good enough for this? Will I be able to keep up? Will I be able to stay the course? Yes. The men around us are not questioning themselves. The men around us are not doubting themselves. So why do we? Trainings such as that the Konrad Adenauer Foundation provides gives women the confidence and the assurance that they know their subject, that they're ready to, for example, speak in public. They're ready to give voice to their aspirations. I think we need to do this locally as much as possible. I think we need to do this nationally, regionally, and internationally as much as possible. I think training young women is absolutely critical, as the training helps women. It doesn't just give skills, but in giving skills, in giving women the training that they need, it also helps erase any self-doubt that they might have. Of course, the main barriers are not within ourselves. They are around us structurally, and sometimes still even legally or in policy. So part of these networks, whether they're women's wings in political parties or NGOs working for women or international NGOs, we need to put our money where our mouth is. We need to find ways to finance women candidates, because let's face it, that is the greatest barrier in a world of politics that is increasingly becoming more money driven. Lastly, we need to support the few women out there. Bashing the few women out there is quite simply making it even more difficult for ourselves. If I bash the woman from the opposition, I'm ensuring that the same lens will eventually be turned on me. If I'm bashing a more senior woman, for example, then I'm ensuring that the ladder up will be far more difficult for me. But above all, those of us who have combined luck, resources, and circumstances to get here, we need to play it forward. We need to encourage younger women coming up. We need to go out and physically help the younger woman. We need to campaign to get a woman onto the seat. We need to see that every vacant seat, we need to look at every vacant seat as a woman's seat. Some of the examples of what we have achieved in the Maldives, with committed women advocating with each other and with building partnerships with our male colleagues and with each other. Some examples of women who have made it to leadership positions using their influence to bring about changes are: in the Maldives, we have increased the budget for the Ministry of Gender. We have increased the budget for the Family and Children Center. We have revised the Criminal Procedures Act to include rape and sexual offences as grave criminal offences. We have amended the Child Rights Act with sweeping changes. The Act marks significant changes in the legal protection of children, including prohibiting marrying any child below the age of 18. This is a substantial protection for an issue that affects the girl child, and this is a bill that up until now, up until we passed it last year, this is a bill that had been parked for 10 years. We have changed the Police Act so that it is easier for women in the police force to come to leadership positions. We have changed how you seek single parent allowances by making it easier to seek single parent allowances, and we have increased the single parent allowance. We have appointed 2 women for the first time in the history of Maldives. We have put 2 women in the Supreme Court bench. We have increased maternity leave from 6 months with full. We have increased maternity leave to 6 months with full pay. We have amended the Local Councils Act to allocate 33% of council seats for women. We have increased the budget for women's development committees at the island level. We have constituted a parliamentary committee on human rights and gender for the first time in the Maldives Parliament, and we have started a parliamentary inquiry into systematic gender discrimination, including why there's gaps in legislation, why we are unable to implement the legislation that already exists, and identifying various other gaps in the system that are failing to protect women or promoting gender equality. All this work that I have just stated as examples from the Maldives, all this took less than a year. Because we women networked, we leaned in, and we built partnerships with each other. None of this would have happened if there weren't women in positions of leadership. And none of this would have happened if the very few women who are in leadership had not worked with each other to bring about these changes. I hope these changes make it easier for the women in all aspects of Maldivian society. There's definitely a long way to go, but we are getting there. We will get there if we learn to work with each other.